The morning
What are
sun
those,
cast long
scars?
golden rays
Looks
through the
like you lost that
salt-stained
fight,
windows of
Private.
the Sunrise Coffee House, a small veteran-owned cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter. Staff Sergeant Rachel Chen sat in her usual spot, the corner booth farthest from the door, positioned with her back against the wall and a clear view of all entrances. Old habits from Afghanistan died hard, even 3 years after coming home. Her fingers traced the rim of her ceramic coffee cup in slow, deliberate circles. The burned scars covering her left hand caught the morning light, the mottled pink and white tissue creating a roadmap of pain across her skin. The scarring didn't stop at her hand. It traveled up her arm, across her neck, and consumed the entire left side of her face, pulling at the corner of her eye and mouth in a permanent reminder of the day her life changed forever. Rachel had learned to navigate the world of stares and whispers. She developed a thick skin against the children who pointed, the adults who looked away too quickly, the well-meaning strangers who thanked her for her service, while their eyes betrayed their discomfort. Tuesday mornings at the sunrise had become her ritual, a small rebellion against the isolation that threatened to consume her. Here, she could sit with her coffee and her memories, practicing the simple act of existing in public without the weight of others' judgment crushing her spirit. But today was different. The door chimed, and 3 young men burst in with the boisterous energy of youth and accomplishment. Rachel recognized them immediately, fresh Marines, probably graduated from MCRD San Diego within the last week. Their dress blue uniforms were still crisp and perfect, creases sharp enough to cut paper, brass buttons gleaming like tiny suns. They carried themselves with the peculiar swagger of men who'd survived boot camp and believed they'd conquered the world. The one in the middle, tall, blond, with a square jaw and bright blue eyes, seemed to be the ringleader. His name tape read Morrison. He couldn't have been more than 19 years old, his face still holding the softness of adolescence beneath his attempt at military bearing. His buddies flanked him, feeding off his energy, laughing at his jokes, caught up in the intoxicating rush of becoming Marines. Rachel watched them order their coffees, their voices loud and confident, discussing their plans for liberty, the girls they'd meet, the bars they'd hit. She felt a distant pang of nostalgia for that innocence, that moment before war taught you what the uniform really meant. Then Morrison's eyes landed on her. She saw the sequence of emotions cross his face in rapid succession: curiosity, recognition of her Marine Corps t-shirt, then shock as he registered her scars. His expression shifted again, and what came next made Rachel's blood run cold. Not pity, not respect, not even polite discomfort. Instead, a smirk pulled at his lips, cruel and dismissive. He leaned toward his friends, speaking in a stage whisper deliberately loud enough for her to hear. "Check out the Halloween costume in the corner," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like someone took war paint a little too literally." His buddy's laughter came nervous and uncertain, but it came nonetheless. Encouraged, Morrison continued, his young voice carrying across the now quieting coffee shop. "Bet she bought those dog tags at a surplus store. Probably got those scars in a kitchen fire and wants people to think she's some kind of hero." The barista, a former Army sergeant named Mike who always gave Rachel her coffee at half price, froze mid-pour, his jaw clenching. Several patrons looked up, discomfort rippling through the cafe like a stone thrown into still water. An elderly couple near the window exchanged troubled glances. A woman with a laptop halfway closed it, torn between intervening and avoiding confrontation. But no one said anything, no one moved. Rachel's fingers stopped their circular motion on the coffee cup. Her hand trembled slightly, a lingering effect from the nerve damage, though in this moment it felt like pure rage. She'd faced Taliban fighters, walked through AD-infested roads, endured 17 surgeries and months of agonizing physical therapy. She'd lost her face, her career, her fiancé, and nearly her life in service to her country. And now this child, this boy playing dress-up in a uniform he hadn't yet earned the right to wear, mocked her sacrifice for cheap laughs. Morrison was on a roll now, feeding off the attention, his voice growing louder. I mean, come on. You really think they let women do anything dangerous over there? She probably worked in an office and made up some story. Stolen valor, man. It's everywhere these days. People wanting respect they didn't earn. Rachel slowly began gathering her things, her phone, her keys, the worn paperback novel she'd been pretending to read. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her pain. She wouldn't engage. What would be the point? He was too young, too ignorant, too wrapped up in his own false sense of superiority to understand anything she might say. Her mind flickered unbidden to that day in Helmand Province. The heat, the dust, the children's laughter, the pile of rocks that looked wrong, the blinding flash, the fire. She stood, ready to leave with what remained of her dignity. That's when the door chimed again, and everything changed. 3 men entered the cafe, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. They moved with the fluid, economical grace of big cats, controlled, aware, dangerous. Dressed in casual civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, tactical boots, they nonetheless radiated an unmistakable aura of military professionalism. The tallest of the 3 had steel-gray temples contrasting with dark hair, ice-blue eyes that swept the room in a practiced threat assessment, and the bearing of someone who'd operated in the world's darkest corners. His forearms were corded with muscle and marked with tattoos, one of which Rachel recognized immediately, the Navy SEAL trident. These weren't weekend warriors or posers. These were silent professionals, men who'd earned their reputations in blood and sand. The tall one's eyes moved from Morrison to Rachel, reading the situation with the speed of someone trained to make life-or-death decisions in microseconds. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He walked straight to Morrison, his movements so purposeful that conversations died in his wake. His hand came down on the young Marine's shoulder, not aggressive, but firm enough to convey absolute authority. Got a minute, devil dog? His voice was quiet, controlled, carrying the kind of calm that preceded storms. We need to have a conversation. Morrison turned, annoyance flashing across his face, ready to brush off another civilian who didn't understand military culture. Then he saw the trident tattoo. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. The other 2 SEALs had positioned themselves strategically, cutting off Morrison's exit routes without seeming threatening. It was instinctive, automatic, the product of hundreds of operations where positioning meant survival. Rachel remained standing, her bag half-packed, transfixed by the scene unfolding before her. The game was about to change, and young Marine Morrison was about to receive an education that boot camp never provided. Rachel's hand froze on her bag as she watched the 3 former SEALs surround the young Marine. The scene before her began to blur, reality bleeding into memory like watercolors running together on wet paper. The cafe's air conditioning couldn't stop the sudden heat that flushed through her body, phantom sensation, her therapist called it, post-traumatic stress response. But to Rachel it felt real, it always felt real. The coffee cup in her scarred hand trembled, and suddenly she wasn't in San Diego anymore. She was back. The heat hit her first in the memory, that oppressive, suffocating Afghan heat that turned your uniform into a sweat-soaked second skin and made every breath feel like inhaling from an oven. Staff Sergeant Rachel Chen, 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, led her 4-vehicle convoy down Route Silver, a dirt road cutting through Helmand Province like a scar across wounded earth. The date was June 15th, 3 years ago. The temperature was 118 degrees Fahrenheit. She'd checked that morning, not that it mattered. Hell was hell at any temperature. Viper 6, this is Viper 1, how copy? Her own voice echoed in her memory, young and confident, untouched by the horror that was coming. Lima Charlie, Viper 1. Route looks clear from our position, came the reply from her vehicle commander. But it wasn't clear. Rachel's gut told her something was wrong. She was riding in the lead vehicle. the most dangerous position in any convoy, the one that typically hit IEDs first. As the team's combat engineer and route clearance specialist, it was her job to identify threats before they killed her Marines. She'd volunteered for every dangerous assignment, determined to prove that women could handle combat roles just as effectively as men. More than that, she wanted to prove it to herself. The Helmand River Valley stretched out on both sides of the route, deceptively beautiful in the harsh sunlight. Poppy fields swayed in the hot wind. In the distance, mud brick compounds dotted the landscape like ancient fortresses. Children played near the road ahead, their laughter carrying on the breeze, a sound so innocent it seemed obscene in a war zone. That's when Rachel saw it. A pile of rocks near the village entrance. Not unusual in Afghanistan, rocks were everywhere. But these rocks were different, two deliberately placed, two perfectly positioned to funnel traffic into a specific kill zone. The children were playing dangerously close to it. Halt, halt, halt! Rachel's command brought the convoy to a stop. Possible IED, 11 o'clock, approximately 50 meters. Her heart hammered against her body armor as she grabbed her metal detector and toolkit. Protocol dictated she send the Talon robot, a small remote-controlled device designed for exactly this scenario. Protocol kept engineers alive, but the children were right there, maybe 20 feet from what she increasingly believed was an explosive device. Viper 1, let me send the bot, Corporal Martinez urged from the driver's seat, his dark eyes worried behind his Oakley sunglasses. Negative, too many civilians. I'm not risking remote detonation with kids that close. Rachel's hand was already on the door handle. If this goes wrong, pull back and call EOD. That's an order, Martinez. Staff Sergeant, please. That's an order, Corporal. She remembered stepping out of the MRAP, the heat hitting her like a physical blow. The weight of her gear, body armor, helmet, weapons, tools, pressed down on her shoulders. 70 pounds of equipment on a 5'6" frame, but Rachel had trained until she could move with it as naturally as her own skin. The children noticed her approaching and ran toward her, thinking the American soldier wanted to play. She smiled, forcing calm into her voice as she spoke the Pashto phrases she'd memorized. Go to your homes, quickly now. It's not safe here. She handed them packets of candy from her pocket, gently steering them away from the rock pile, her eyes never leaving the suspicious mound. An old man emerged from a nearby compound, herding the children away with urgent gestures. His eyes met Rachel's for just a moment, and she saw fear there. He knew. The locals always knew. With the civilians clear, Rachel approached the rock pile with her metal detector. The device screamed immediately, a high-pitched wail that meant significant metal content beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, methodically, she began removing rocks, using her training to look for pressure plates, tripwires, command wires. That's when she found the first IED. It was crude but effective, a pressure plate design rigged to a 155 artillery shell. Enough explosive to vaporize her vehicle and everyone in it. But something felt wrong. The placement was too obvious, the triggering mechanism too easy to spot. Rachel had seen this before. Taliban bomb makers were getting sophisticated, learning from their mistakes, adapting their tactics. They'd started building complex IED networks, one obvious device to stop the convoy, a second hidden device to kill the dismounted engineers who came to investigate. She keyed her radio. Viper 6, I've got a confirmed IED pressure plate type, but I think it's a decoy, pulling back to scan the area. Negative, Viper 1, Rose says mark it and pull back. EOD is 15 minutes out. But 15 minutes meant her convoy sitting static in a kill zone. Sitting static got Marines killed. Rachel had lost friends that way in her first deployment. She wasn't losing any this time. Roger that, Viper 6, but I'm checking for secondaries first. These kids were playing right here. If there's more, I need to mark it so EOD knows what they're walking into. Against protocol, against orders, but the right call. Rachel expanded her search pattern, moving in careful circles around the first device. Her detector stayed silent for 5 meters, then 10. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was no secondary. Then, 15 meters from the first IED, hidden beneath a pile of debris that looked like ordinary trash, the detector screamed again. Her blood ran cold. This one was different, more sophisticated. Command wire detonation, which meant someone was watching, waiting for the optimal moment to trigger it. The wire snaked away through the dirt, disappearing toward the nearest compound. Rachel followed it with her eyes, calculating angles, trying to spot the triggerman. Movement in a second-story window, just a shadow but enough. Viper 6, I've got a secondary device, command wire initiated, and I think I've got eyes on the triggerman. Send a fire team to the compound at. She never finished the sentence. The world exploded. Later, the investigation would reveal there was a third IED, one she'd never seen, buried even deeper and rigged with a secondary trigger in case the first two failed to detonate. The Taliban bomb maker had created a masterpiece of death, a nested network designed to kill at multiple stages of the clearance operation. Rachel remembered the flash, white and gold and impossibly bright, like staring into the surface of the sun. Then came the pressure wave, a massive invisible hand that picked her up and threw her through the air like a rag doll. She was flying, weightless, disconnected from Earth and reality. The sound came next, but it wasn't really sound anymore. It was a physical force that pulverized the air and vibrated through every cell in her body. Her eardrums ruptured instantly, replacing the world's audio with a high-pitched ringing that would last for weeks. Then the fire found her. The IED had been packed with white phosphorus along with conventional explosives, a particularly cruel addition designed to create burns that would continue burning even after the initial blast. The chemical fire latched onto her left side like a living thing, hungry and relentless. It melted through her uniform, through her gear, finding the skin beneath. Rachel tried to scream, but her lungs had been emptied by the blast. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. There was only pain, pure, absolute, reality-destroying pain that transcended anything she'd imagined possible. Her training kicked in on autopilot. Through the agony, through the shock, through the realization that she was dying, Rachel's hand found her radio. The talk button was melting into her palm, fusing with her burning flesh, but she pressed it anyway. IED, network, compound, second story, each word cost her everything. 37 in convoy, mark, my position. She was telling them where the triggerman was, warning them about the compound, giving them the information that would save their lives even as hers drained away into the Afghan dirt. Her last conscious thought before the darkness took her was simple: my Marines are safe. My Marines are safe. In the Sunrise Coffee House in San Diego, Rachel's hand released her coffee cup. It shattered on the floor, the sound jerking her back to the present. She was shaking, sweat pouring down her face despite the air conditioning. The young Marine Morrison stared at her, his earlier mockery forgotten, replaced by confusion and the first hints of dawning horror. The tall SEAL with the gray temples was watching her too, recognition in his eyes. He knew what he was seeing. He'd been there himself, that 1,000-yard stare, that moment when past and present collided. "You're her," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the ringing in Rachel's ears. "You're the Marine from Route Silver." Explosion had launched Rachel 15 feet through the air, her body ragdoll limp as physics and violence conspired to destroy her. She didn't remember the landing. Her mind had mercifully shut down by then, overwhelmed by sensory input no human brain was designed to process. But Corporal Martinez remembered. He'd watched his staff sergeant fly through the air in a corona of fire and land in a crumpled heap, her body armor smoking, her uniform burning. "Staff sergeants down! Staff sergeants down!" Martinez's voice had cracked over the radio, breaking the strict communication protocols drilled into every Marine. But protocols meant nothing when you watched your leader, the woman who just saved your life, burning alive in the dirt. Martinez and Lance Corporal Johnson didn't hesitate. Against every rule of engagement, against the screaming warnings from their vehicle commander, against their own survival instincts that told them more IEDs were likely in the area, they dismounted and ran toward Rachel's smoking body. "Get back in the vehicle, that's an order," their platoon commander shouted over the radio. They ignored him. Martinez reached Rachel first, his hands grabbing for her drag strap even as the white phosphorus continued to burn. The chemical fire latched onto his gloves, and he threw them off, using his bare hands to pull her away from the blast crater. Johnson provided cover, his rifle scanning for the triggerman Rachel had identified with her last coherent words. "She's still alive, I've got a pulse," Martinez screamed, disbelief and hope warring in his voice. They dragged her 30 meters to the nearest cover, a low mud wall that offered concealment from the compound where the triggerman had been. Johnson tore off his camelback and poured water over Rachel's burns, trying desperately to stop the white phosphorus reaction. The chemical ate through tissue with relentless efficiency, and Johnson's water only slowed it, didn't stop it. The corpsman, HM2 Rodriguez, appeared at a dead sprint, his medical bag bouncing against his hip. He took one look at Rachel and his face went pale beneath his tan. Burns covered at least 40% of her body, concentrated on her left side. Her face was barely recognizable. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, shock setting in fast. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, then caught himself. Training took over. "Martinez, I need you to hold pressure here. Johnson, get me 2 bags of saline from the vehicle. Move." Rodriguez worked with practiced efficiency born from too many combat injuries, too many young bodies broken by war. He established an airway, started IV lines, administered morphine and antibiotics, covered the burns with specialized dressings. But even as he worked, he knew Rachel needed a level of care he couldn't provide in the Afghan desert. "Viper 6, this is Viper 3. I need an urgent CASEVAC Category Alpha. Multiple serious burns, likely internal injuries. Patient is critical," Rodriguez radioed, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The medevac helicopter arrived 12 minutes later, 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. The pilots came in hot, taking fire from the compound Rachel had identified. An Apache gunship escort lit up the building's second story with 30 cannon fire, neutralizing the threat. As they loaded Rachel onto the helicopter, Martinez held her hand, the one that wasn't burned, and leaned close to her ear. "You saved us, Staff Sergeant, all of us. Don't you dare die on us now. That's an order." Rachel's eyes flickered open for just a moment, unfocused and filled with agony. Her lips moved, forming words Martinez couldn't hear over the helicopter's rotor wash, but he read them clearly enough. "My Marines. Safe. Safe, Staff Sergeant. Every single one because of you." A ghost of a smile touched her ruined face before unconsciousness claimed her again. The flight to Camp Bastion took 18 minutes. Rachel coded twice during transport, her heart stopping as her body surrendered to shock and trauma. Both times, the flight medic brought her back, performing CPR at altitude while the helicopter banked and weaved to avoid potential ground fire. At Bastion, a team of surgeons was already prepped and waiting. They worked on Rachel for 9 hours straight, fighting to stabilize her enough for the flight to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The lead surgeon, a Navy commander named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had seen hundreds of combat casualties during her deployment. Later, she would tell investigators that Rachel's survival was medically improbable. "The amount of trauma her body sustained should have been fatal," Dr. Mitchell stated in her report. "The combination of blast injuries, white phosphorus burns, and the time elapsed before advanced medical intervention typically results in mortality. Staff Sergeant Chen survived through a combination of exceptional physical conditioning, immediate first aid from her team, and what I can only describe as sheer force of will. The flight to Germany happened while Rachel floated in a medically induced coma, her body wrapped in specialized burn dressings, machines breathing for her, pumping blood for her, keeping her tethered to life by the thinnest of threads. She woke up 6 days later in Landstuhl's intensive care unit. The first thing she tried to do was scream, but the ventilator tube down her throat prevented it. The second thing she tried to do was move, but her body was immobilized, wrapped like a mummy. The third thing she tried to do was understand why everything hurt, why existence itself had become synonymous with agony. A nurse appeared in her field of vision, a kind-faced woman with gray hair and soft eyes who'd seen too many young service members wake to their new reality. "Staff Sergeant Chen, you're safe. You're in Germany. You were injured in Afghanistan, but you're going to be okay. Don't try to move. Don't try to talk. Just breathe with the machine. Can you blink once if you understand me?" Rachel blinked. "Good, you're very strong, Staff Sergeant. The doctors say you're a fighter. Your family has been notified. They're flying in to see you. Your Marines have been calling every day to check on you. You saved their lives, and now we're going to save yours." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain medications and surgical procedures. Rachel underwent the first of what would eventually total 17 surgeries. The doctors worked to debride dead tissue, perform skin grafts, reconstruct damaged muscles and tendons. Each surgery bought her a little more function, a little less pain, but took away a little more of the person she'd been. The worst moment came on day 12, when they finally let her see a mirror. Dr. Mitchell had warned her, prepared her as much as anyone could be prepared for such a thing, but nothing could have truly readied Rachel for the sight of her transformed face. The left side was a landscape of scars, pink and white tissue pulled tight, her eye drooping slightly, her mouth twisted into a permanent half-grimace. Her hair had burned away on that side, leaving patches of scarred scalp visible. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. Rachel stared at her reflection for a full minute in complete silence. Then the tears came, great racking sobs that hurt her healing lungs and pulled at her stitches but couldn't be stopped. Dr. Mitchell held her hand while she cried, offering no false platitudes, no empty promises that it would get better, just human presence in the face of devastating loss. "I know this isn't what you want to hear right now," Dr. Mitchell said quietly once the sobs subsided, "but you're alive, Staff Sergeant. That blast should have killed you. The burns should have killed you. The shock should have killed you, but you're here, you survived, and that means something." "What does it mean?" Rachel's voice was hoarse, damaged by the ventilator tube. "What was the point of surviving if I look like this? If I can't go back to my unit? If I can't be a Marine anymore?" "I don't have that answer," Dr. Mitchell admitted. "But I know 37 Marines who went home to their families because of you. I know your actions that day led to intelligence that helped Special Operations Forces identify and eliminate a major IED network. The reports say your sacrifice saved hundreds of lives. Maybe that's the point." But lying in that hospital bed, staring at her ruined reflection, Rachel couldn't see it. All she could see was what she'd lost. Her fiancé, David, arrived 3 days later. He'd been her high school sweetheart, the man who'd waded through her deployments, who'd talked about marriage and children and a future filled with normal, beautiful things. He walked into her room with flowers and a smile that crumbled the moment he saw her face. Rachel watched him try to hide his reaction, watched him school his features into something resembling composure, but she saw the truth in his eyes, the revulsion, the horror, the barely concealed desire to flee. He stayed for 2 months, visiting dutifully, saying the right things, playing the role of supportive partner. But he couldn't hide the way his eyes slid away from her scars, couldn't fake the physical intimacy that had once come naturally. The nightmares were the final straw, Rachel screaming herself awake at 3 a.m., thrashing against invisible flames, her body rigid with remembered terror. "I can't do this," David finally admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Rachel, I'm so sorry. I want to be strong enough, but I'm not. I can't watch you suffer. I can't be what you need. I'm sorry." He left his engagement ring on her bedside table and walked out of her life. Rachel didn't cry when he left. She'd already cried herself empty. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief. One more loss in a long list of losses. One more piece of her old life falling away. The Marine Corps medically retired her 4 months later with full honors. They awarded her the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, and a disability rating that came with monthly compensation but couldn't compensate for what she'd lost. At her ceremony, the commandant himself pinned on her medal and called her the embodiment of Marine Corps values. But when Rachel looked in the mirror, she didn't see a hero. She saw a ghost, someone caught between the Marine she'd been and the civilian she was supposed to become, belonging fully to neither world. She moved to San Diego to be near the VA hospital, where the specialists who understood burn treatment and PTSD could monitor her recovery. She found a small apartment, started physical therapy, attended counseling sessions that felt performative and hollow. And she started going to the Sunrise Coffee House on Tuesday mornings, trying to practice being human again. Until a young Marine named Morrison mocked her sacrifice and reminded her that the world didn't see her service, only her scars. The tall SEAL's words hung in the air like a challenge. "You're her. You're the Marine from Root Silver." Rachel's throat constricted. She nodded once, unable to speak, her hands still trembling from the flashback that had dragged her back to Afghanistan. The shattered coffee cup lay at her feet in a pool of dark liquid, fragments of ceramic catching the morning light like shrapnel. Morrison stood frozen, his earlier bravado evaporating as confusion spread across his young face. He looked from Rachel to the 3 SEALs and back again, trying to piece together what was happening. His 2 buddies had gone silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the way predators sense a coming storm. The tall SEAL released Morrison's shoulder and took a step toward Rachel, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Up close, she could see the scars on his hands, the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in harsh environments. His forearms bore multiple tattoos, the SEAL trident, Arabic script, coordinates that probably marked significant operations. This was a man who'd seen the elephant, who'd operated in the same dark places Rachel had. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Daniels. These are my teammates, James Chen and Trevor Matthews." He gestured to the other 2 SEALs. James was Asian American, compact and muscular with intelligent eyes and a quiet intensity. Trevor was broad-shouldered and dark-skinned, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and the calm demeanor of someone comfortable with violence. "We deployed to Helmand Province in 2022, same time frame as your incident. Our team worked operations in the same AO." Rachel found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "I don't remember much about the aftermath." "You wouldn't," James said, stepping forward. His voice carried a slight Boston accent. "You were medevaced out while the scene was still hot, but we remember. Our platoon was operating about 10 clicks north when the call came through about a complex IED attack on Root Silver. We were tasked with the follow-up." Trevor picked up the narrative, his voice deep and measured. "Your radio call, the one you made while burning, gave us the compound location, second-story window, probable triggerman position. Command wanted us to investigate and clear the threat before EOD could safely work the route." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We found the bomb maker in that compound. He'd been setting up IED networks along Route Silver for months, killed 17 coalition forces in the previous year. Your intelligence from that day, from the worst moment of your life, helped us piece together his entire network. The operation we ran based on your information dismantled his cell and saved hundreds of lives." Rachel felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking but opening. For 3 years she'd questioned whether her sacrifice had meant anything. The medals and citations felt hollow, words on paper that couldn't give her back her face or her career. But hearing these men, operators who lived in the shadows, who didn't give praise lightly, tell her that her worst day had meaning beyond her own suffering, something shifted. Morrison had gone pale. His hands hung at his sides, clenched into fists, but not from aggression, from shame. The color had drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. Marcus turned back to the young Marine, and his voice dropped into a register that suggested this was not a conversation Morrison could refuse. Staff Sergeant Chen was a combat engineer. Do you know what that means, Marine? Morrison shook his head mutely. It means she walked point, every single day. Marcus emphasized each word. Combat engineers are the first ones into danger. They're the ones who walk the roads looking for IEDs so convoys like yours, full of Marines heading home, don't get blown to pieces. They do the most dangerous job in the entire theater of operations, and they do it knowing that any step could be their last. James moved closer to Morrison, his voice quieter but no less intense. The day Staff Sergeant Chen got hit, she was clearing Route Silver for a convoy of 37 Marines and sailors. She found the first IED, a 155 artillery shell rigged to a pressure plate. That alone could have destroyed the lead vehicle and killed everyone inside. But she didn't just mark it and call EOD, Trevor continued, creating a wall of testimony around the young Marine. She knew something was wrong. The placement was too obvious. So she expanded her search pattern and found the second device, command wire initiated, which meant someone was actively watching, waiting to detonate it manually. Marcus's voice grew harder. She was tracking the wire to find the triggerman when the third device, the one she never saw detonated, white phosphorus and conventional explosives. The blast threw her 15 feet through the air and set her on fire. White phosphorus burns at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't stop burning when you try to put it out. It keeps going, eating through whatever it touches. The coffee shop had gone completely silent. Every patron was listening now, frozen in place. The barista, Mike, stood behind the counter with tears streaming down his face, his own memories of combat clearly triggered by the story. While she was burning alive, James said, his voice rough with emotion, while her skin was melting, while she was in more pain than any human being should ever experience, she keyed her radio. She gave us the compound location. She warned about the triggerman. She made sure her Marines knew how to stay safe. Her last conscious act before passing out was saving the lives of 37 men and women she'd never met. Morrison's knees buckled slightly. One of his buddies, a short, stocky Marine with the name tape, Rodriguez, caught his elbow, steadying him. But Rodriguez looked equally shaken, his eyes wide with horror and dawning understanding. "You want to know if she really served?" Marcus's voice cut like a blade. "Staff Sergeant Chen earned the Bronze Star with valor. That's not a participation trophy. That's given for heroic or meritorious achievement in combat. She also earned the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, those dog tags you mocked. She paid for them with 17 surgeries, months of physical therapy, PTSD that probably wakes her up screaming most nights, and a face that makes people like you think she didn't earn the uniform she wore." Trevor stepped forward, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up archived news articles, official military press releases, citation documents. Here's the press release from Marine Corps Forces Central Command, dated June 2022. Staff Sergeant Rachel Chen, combat engineer, 1st CEB, saved the lives of an entire convoy through her quick thinking and selfless actions under fire. Want to see the citation for her Bronze Star? I've got that too. He turned the phone toward Morrison, who looked at it like it might bite him. The article showed a photo, Rachel before the attack, standing with her unit, her face whole and unmarked, smiling with the confident pride of a Marine who'd earned her place. The contrast between that photo and the scarred woman standing across the coffee shop hit Morrison like a physical blow. The intelligence Staff Sergeant Chen provided while literally dying, Marcus continued, led to a joint Special Operations Task Force mission 3 weeks later. We hit 5 compounds simultaneously, rolled up the entire IED network, captured the bomb maker and his apprentices. The explosive precursors we seized would have been enough to build at least 40 more devices. How many lives do you think that saved? I don't. Morrison's voice failed him completely. James's voice softened slightly, but remained firm. In our community, the Special Operations community, we rely on conventional forces like combat engineers to do the hard, dangerous groundwork that makes our missions possible. We rely on Marines like Staff Sergeant Chen to clear the routes, mark the hazards, take the risks that let us operate. The respect between SOF and combat engineers is absolute because we know they're walking through hell so we don't have to. Marcus looked back at Rachel and something in his expression softened, not pity but recognition. One warrior acknowledging another. Ma'am, I apologize for bringing up painful memories, but this young Marine needed to understand exactly who he was mocking, exactly what those scars represent. Rachel stood straighter, finding strength in their words that she hadn't felt in months. The shame she'd carried, the feeling that her scars made her less than, made her broken, made her something to hide, began to crack under the weight of their testimony. We never got to thank you personally, Trevor said, addressing Rachel directly. Your actions that day saved our teammates too. We were running operations in the same area. That IED network you helped us dismantle, it was targeting SOF teams as much as conventional forces. Some of my brothers are alive today because of what you did. Morrison finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Ma'am, he swallowed hard, tears now streaming freely down his young face. Oh my God, what have I done? What did I say? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Marcus held up a hand, stopping Morrison's apology midstream. Not yet. You don't get to apologize yet. First, you're going to sit down and listen, all of you. He gestured to Morrison's 2 buddies who looked equally devastated. You're going to hear the rest of this story. You're going to understand the full weight of what you mocked. Then maybe, if Staff Sergeant Chen is gracious enough to hear it, you can try to apologize. He turned to Rachel and his voice gentled. Ma'am, would you be willing to sit with us, to help educate these young Marines about what real service looks like? You don't owe them anything, and if you'd rather leave, no one here would blame you. But if you're willing, I think this could be a teaching moment they'll never forget. Rachel looked at Morrison, at his tear-stained face, at the absolute devastation in his eyes, at the way his hands shook with shame and remorse. She saw herself in him, saw the arrogant young Marine she'd been before Afghanistan taught her what courage really cost. And she made a decision that would change more lives than she could imagine. I'll stay, she said quietly. Pull up some chairs. The scraping of chairs across the coffee shop's hardwood floor echoed in the tense silence. Marcus gestured to a cluster of tables near the window, and within seconds, the 3 SEALs had efficiently rearranged the furniture into a configuration that allowed everyone to sit while maintaining clear sightlines to the exits. Old habits from years of operations where situational awareness meant survival. Morrison and his 2 buddies, Rodriguez and a tall, lanky Marine whose name tape read Jackson, sat with the rigid posture of recruits at attention, though no one had ordered them to. Their dress blue uniforms suddenly felt like costumes, pristine and unearned, compared to the quiet authority radiating from the 3 former SEALs and the scarred Marine who'd paid for her service in blood and fire. Mike, the barista, appeared with a tray of fresh coffee, refusing payment with a subtle shake of his head. His eyes lingered on Rachel with unmistakable respect. On the house, he said simply. All of it. As a former Army sergeant who'd lost 3 friends to IEDs in Iraq, he understood the weight of what was happening at these tables. Rachel sat carefully, her back straight despite the chronic pain that lived in her left side, nerve damage and scar tissue that would never fully heal. She wrapped her scarred hands around the new coffee cup, drawing strength from its warmth. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Morrison with an intensity that made the young Marine squirm. "Before we go any further, I need you three to understand something fundamental. The military, especially the Marine Corps, runs on respect. Not the kind of respect that comes from rank or position, but the kind that's earned through sacrifice and service. Do you understand that concept?" "Yes, sir," Morrison responded automatically, his voice hoarse. "I'm not a sir. I work for a living," Marcus corrected with the classic enlisted response, though there was no humor in his tone. "But here's what you need to understand. Respect isn't just about saluting officers or following orders. It's about recognizing that everyone who puts on this uniform carries a burden. Some carry it visibly, like Staff Sergeant Chen. Others carry it invisibly: PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, moral wounds that never show up on X-rays. Your job as Marines is to honor that burden, not mock it." James pulled his phone back out, swiping through screens until he found what he was looking for. "Let me give you some context about combat engineers that clearly nobody covered in your boot camp classes." He turned the phone so the young Marines could see a video, grainy helmet camera footage from Afghanistan. The footage showed a Marine in full gear walking slowly down a dirt road, sweeping a metal detector back and forth in careful arcs. The landscape was eerily quiet, just the crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional beeping of the detector. Suddenly, the Marine stopped, knelt down, and began carefully brushing away dirt with a small tool. "That's a combat engineer clearing a route," James explained. "Notice how slow and methodical the movement is. That's because one wrong step, one missed indicator, and you're gone. Not wounded. Gone. IEDs don't leave much behind." The video continued, showing the Marine marking the location with flags and calling for an explosive ordnance disposal team. The whole process took nearly 20 minutes, 20 minutes of extreme focus and constant danger. "Now imagine doing that every single day," Trevor added, his deep voice carrying the weight of experience. "Day after day, knowing that statistically, if you do this job long enough, you're probably going to get hit." Combat engineers had one of the highest casualty rates of any MOS in Afghanistan. They walked point because if they didn't, everyone else would be at risk. Morrison's hands were shaking now, clasped together on the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I didn't know," he whispered. "They didn't teach us that. We learned about infantry, about tanks and artillery, but nobody talked about engineers." "That's part of the problem," Marcus said, though his tone had lost some of its edge. "The military doesn't always do a good job of teaching young service members about the full spectrum of sacrifice. The headlines talk about infantry firefights and special operations raids because that's what makes dramatic news. But the truth is, some of the most dangerous, most essential jobs in combat zones are done by people most civilians have never heard of. Engineers, corpsmen, EOD techs, support personnel who keep the war machine running." Rachel had been silent, listening to the SEALs paint the picture of her former life. Now she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I loved my job," she said, and Morrison's eyes snapped to her face, then away, then back, as if he was forcing himself to look at her, to see her. "From the moment I qualified as a combat engineer, I knew I'd found my calling. There was something pure about it. The mission was simple: find the bombs before they kill your Marines, keep the routes clear, save lives." How did you do it?" Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you walk those roads knowing what could happen?" Rachel considered the question, memories flickering through her mind like old film reels. "Training helps. You train until the procedures become automatic, until your hands know what to do even when your brain is screaming at you to run. But honestly, you do it because the alternative is unacceptable. If I didn't walk point, someone else would have to, and I was good at it. I had instincts for spotting disturbances in the environment, for reading the patterns." "Until the day you didn't," Jackson said, then immediately looked horrified at his own words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "No, you're right," Rachel interrupted, surprising him. "Until the day I didn't see it coming. That's the thing about IEDs. The bomb makers are constantly evolving their tactics, learning from their failures, getting more sophisticated. The device that got me was a triple-nested network, 3 separate IEDs working together. I found the first 2. I never saw the third. Marcus nodded grimly. We studied that attack pattern when we were planning our follow-up operations. The bomb maker who built that network was a former Iraqi insurgent who'd moved to Afghanistan to train Taliban fighters. He was responsible for at least 40 coalition deaths and probably 3 times that many wounded. He was a priority target. What happened to him? Morrison asked, then caught himself. If you can say, I mean. Trevor's expression went cold, the look of a man remembering violence. We found him. Let's leave it at that. James leaned forward, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as emotion crept into his voice. Here's what you need to understand about that day on Route Silver. Staff Sergeant Chen had a choice. She could have followed protocol, sent in the robot to investigate the suspicious pile, maintained a safe distance, waited for EOD. That's what the book says to do. That's the safe play. But there were children nearby, Rachel said softly, playing within 20 feet of what I was increasingly certain was an IED. If it had been command wire detonated while they were there. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. So she made the hard choice, Marcus continued. She cleared the civilians herself, putting herself in the kill zone to get them to safety. That decision, that choice to value Afghan children's lives as much as American lives, that's what separates good Marines from great ones. That's what honor looks like in practice, not just in theory. Morrison's tears were flowing freely now, silent streams down his cheeks that he made no effort to hide. I called you. I said you were. He couldn't finish, choking on his own shame. You said I was wearing a Halloween costume, Rachel finished for him, her voice neutral. You said I probably got these scars in a kitchen fire. You suggested I was committing stolen valor, pretending to be a veteran for attention. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and escape the magnitude of his mistake. Why? Rachel asked, and the simple question carried more weight than any accusation. Why did you assume that? What made you think I hadn't earned these scars? Morrison struggled to answer, his breath coming in short gasps as he fought to articulate something he didn't fully understand himself. I don't know, I just graduated boot camp. I felt like a Marine for the first time in my life. I saw you and I guess I wanted to feel superior, like I was part of something exclusive. I don't know, there's no excuse. There's no reason good enough. Actually, there is a reason, James said quietly. Not an excuse, but a reason. You're 19 years old, you've completed exactly 13 weeks of training, and you have absolutely no idea what real service looks like. You've been taught to be proud, and you should be proud of completing boot camp, but nobody's taught you humility yet. Nobody's shown you the cost of this uniform. Trevor nodded. Boot camp teaches you to be a Marine. Combat teaches you to be humble. The problem is, most Marines today won't see combat. The wars are winding down, so you've got a generation of young service members who have pride without perspective, confidence without context. Marcus stood, walking to the window and looking out at the San Diego streets where civilians went about their daily lives, oblivious to the conversation happening in the coffee shop. Here's the hard truth, Marines. Most Americans have no idea what military service really means anymore. Less than 1% of the population serves. That means 99% of the people you'll interact with for the rest of your lives have no frame of reference for what you've done, what you've sacrificed, what you carry. He turned back to face them. That creates 2 dangers. First, civilians might not respect your service because they don't understand it. Second, you might start to believe your own hype, start to think the uniform itself makes you special without actually earning it through service and sacrifice. Morrison, you fell into that second trap today. Rachel watched the young Marine absorb the lesson, saw the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of understanding. She felt a strange mixture of emotions, anger at his thoughtless cruelty, but also compassion for his ignorance and something else. Hope, maybe, that this moment might change him. The question now, Marcus said, returning to his seat, is what you're going to do with this lesson. You can let shame consume you, or you can let it transform you. You can spend your career feeling guilty, or you can spend it living up to the standard Staff Sergeant Chen set. Marcus let his words settle over the table like a weighted blanket, heavy, but somehow comforting in their clarity. The coffee shop remained silent around them, other patrons pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. The morning sunlight had shifted, streaming through the windows at a different angle, illuminating the scars on Rachel's face and hands with unforgiving brightness. Staff Sergeant Chen, Marcus said, his voice taking on a formal tone that suggested he was about to share something significant. I need to tell you something we learned during our follow-up operations, something that might matter to you. Rachel looked up, her expression guarded. She'd learned over the past 3 years that sometimes information about that day brought closure, and sometimes it just brought fresh pain. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through files until he found what he was looking for, a military intelligence report marked with classification headers. This was declassified 6 months ago as part of the Afghanistan War Records release. I've been carrying it on my phone since then, hoping I might run into you someday. You were looking for me, Rachel's voice held surprise. Not actively searching, Trevor clarified. But we knew you'd been medically retired and relocated to San Diego. We work in this area, run a veterans organization here. It seemed inevitable that our paths would cross eventually. We wanted to thank you properly when they did. James leaned forward, his voice gentle. What Marcus is about to show you is the full intelligence analysis of that day's attack. It includes information that wasn't in your debriefing because you were medevaced out before the investigation concluded. Marcus turned his phone toward Rachel. The screen showed a detailed tactical map with overlay markings, notes, and photographs. The IED network you discovered wasn't meant for a random convoy. Intelligence we gathered from the compound, documents, cell phones, interrogation of the bomb maker, revealed that your convoy was specifically targeted. Rachel's breath caught. What do you mean, specifically targeted? There was an informant in one of the villages along Route Silver, Marcus explained, his voice taking on the clinical tone of someone delivering difficult intelligence. He'd been providing Taliban forces with information about coalition movements. He reported that a female Marine combat engineer was leading route clearance operations in that sector. The bomb maker, a high-value target named Kari Ismail, became obsessed with the idea of killing a female American service member. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She'd always assumed the attack was random, wrong place, wrong time, the cruel mathematics of war. But targeted, specifically designed to kill her because she was a woman doing a job some people believed women shouldn't do. Trevor picked up the narrative. Kari Ismail made it personal. According to the documents we recovered, he spent 3 weeks setting up that particular network. He studied your patterns, your routes, your methods. He built the first IED obvious enough that you'd spot it. He placed the second one where your expanded search pattern would logically lead you. And he buried the third one, the one that got you, in a position calculated specifically for a right-handed person approaching from the angle your training would dictate. He knew how I'd think, Rachel whispered, the realization sinking in. He knew how combat engineers are trained to search. He was good at his job, James said grimly. Former Iraqi insurgent, responsible for training the next generation of bomb makers. He'd studied coalition tactics for over a decade. But here's the thing, he made one critical mistake. Marcus enlarged a section of the map. He was so focused on killing you that he forgot the first rule of ambush operations. Always have an escape route. When you radioed the compound location and the triggerman's position while you were literally on fire, you gave us everything we needed. He was still in that second-story room when our team hit the compound 40 minutes later. He thought he had time to escape, but your warning let us lock down the area immediately. We went in with full clearance for lethal force, Trevor said, his voice hard. He had a dead man's trigger in his hand, a backup detonator for additional IEDs we hadn't found yet. He was going to kill the EOD team that came to clear the route. When he saw us coming, he tried to activate it. Tried, James emphasized. Our breacher put 2 rounds center mass before his finger could complete the trigger pull. He died instantly. Never got to kill another American service member. Never got to train another bomb maker. Never got to hurt another family. Rachel felt a complicated swirl of emotions. She'd never thought much about the person who tried to kill her. In her mind, the enemy had always been abstract, a faceless representation of the Taliban. But knowing he'd specifically targeted her because she was a woman, because her existence in a combat role offended his ideology, that changed something. The intelligence we gathered from that compound, Marcus continued, led to a series of operations over the next 3 months. We identified 17 other bomb makers in Qari Ismail's network, 23 weapons caches, and 31 IED factories. The joint task force operations that followed resulted in the capture or elimination of the entire network. He pulled up another file, a casualty projection analysis. Military intelligence estimated that Qari Ismail's network, if left operational, would have been responsible for approximately 200 coalition deaths over the following year. Your actions, finding those devices, radioing the compound location, giving us actionable intelligence while you were dying, prevented those deaths. 200 families got to keep their sons and daughters, their husbands and wives, their mothers and fathers. Morrison made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. His face had gone from pale to ashen, the magnitude of Rachel's sacrifice becoming clearer with each revelation. "There's more," Trevor said, pulling up his own phone. "After we dismantled the network, we found training materials, videos Qari Ismail had been producing to teach other insurgents his techniques. In one of the videos, recorded about a week before your attack, he specifically talks about the American woman engineer and how killing her would be a propaganda victory. He played a clip, grainy footage of a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing speaking in Pashto, with English subtitles scrolling across the bottom. Rachel watched herself described as a symbol of Western corruption, a devil woman who deserved death for daring to serve in a combat role. "He wanted to make an example of you," James said quietly. "He wanted your death to discourage other women from serving in combat positions. He wanted to prove that women couldn't handle the dangers men faced." Rachel's jaw tightened, anger replacing the complicated emotional mix she'd been feeling. "He failed." "Spectacularly," Marcus agreed with grim satisfaction. "Not only did you survive, against all medical odds, but your actions led directly to the destruction of everything he'd built. His death, his network's collapse, all of it can be traced back to that moment when you keyed your radio instead of just dying quietly like he expected." Rodriguez, who'd been silent throughout most of the conversation, spoke up hesitantly. "Staff Sergeant, did you know you were being specifically targeted?" Rachel shook her head. "Intelligence doesn't usually flow down to squad level in real time. We knew there was increased IED activity in our sector, but we didn't know about specific threats against individuals. Even if I had known," she paused, considering, "even if I had known, I would have walked those routes anyway. That was my job. Someone had to do it." "That's the difference between courage and recklessness," Trevor observed. "Courage is knowing the danger and doing what's necessary anyway. You embodied that." Marcus pulled up one more document, a commendation letter signed by a 3-star general. This was written by the commanding general of Marine Forces Central Command. It was part of your Bronze Star citation package, but there's a section that was classified until recently. I want to read it to you." He cleared his throat and began. Staff Sergeant Rachel Chen's actions on June 15, 2022, represent the highest traditions of Marine Corps service. Her tactical acumen in identifying a complex IED network saved the lives of 37 coalition service members. Her courage in clearing civilians from the danger area prevented an unknown number of Afghan casualties. Her presence of mind in radioing actionable intelligence while suffering catastrophic injuries enabled Special Operations Forces to eliminate a high-value target responsible for significant coalition casualties. Her service as one of the first female combat engineers in Marine Corps history opened doors for future generations of women Marines and proved definitively that courage, skill, and dedication to mission transcend gender. Staff Sergeant Chen is a credit to her service, her nation, and the Marine Corps. The words hung in the air, formal and powerful. Morrison was openly weeping now, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jackson had his head bowed, and Rodriguez stared at Rachel with something approaching awe. "That last part," James said, "about opening doors for future generations, that's not just ceremonial language. After your actions became known, female Marine combat engineers started getting more respect, more opportunities. The Marine Corps held you up as proof that the integration of women into combat roles was the right decision. You became a symbol, whether you wanted to be or not." Rachel felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. For 3 years, she'd struggled with feelings of loss and purposelessness. The medals had felt hollow, the praise empty. She'd focused on what she'd lost: her face, her career, her fiancé, her sense of identity. She'd never fully grasped what her sacrifice had accomplished beyond the immediate tactical results. "I didn't do it to be a symbol," she said quietly. "I didn't do it to prove anything about women in combat. I did it because those were my Marines, and it was my job to keep them safe." "That's what makes it meaningful," Marcus replied. "You didn't sacrifice for glory or recognition. You sacrificed because service demanded it. That's the purest form of heroism, doing the right thing simply because it's right, without expectation of reward." Morrison finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and raw. "Staff Sergeant Chen, there are no words. What I said to you, what I implied. I mocked a genuine American hero. I mocked someone who gave everything for people she'd never met. I mocked someone who's done more for this country in one day than I might do in an entire career." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and came to attention with a precision his drill instructors would have been proud of. His hand snapped up in a perfect salute, technically improper indoors and while in civilian company, but the gesture transcended regulations. "I was wrong, ma'am. Completely, utterly, inexcusably wrong. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I am. I'm so sorry." Rachel looked at Morrison standing at attention, his salute held with trembling precision, tears streaming down his young face. The entire coffee shop watched in absolute silence. Even the espresso machine had gone quiet, Mike having stopped his work to witness this moment of raw human transformation. For several long seconds, Rachel didn't move. She studied Morrison's face, saw the genuine anguish there, the horror at his own actions, the desperate need for forgiveness that he knew he didn't deserve. She saw herself reflected in his youth and arrogance, remembered the cocky lance corporal she'd been before her first deployment, before she'd learned that confidence without humility was just pride waiting to be shattered. Finally, she stood. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the chronic pain in her left side making quick motions difficult. She drew herself up to her full height, several inches shorter than Morrison, and returned his salute with the crisp precision of a Marine who'd earned every inch of that gesture. "At ease, Marine," she said quietly. Morrison dropped his salute but remained rigid, his body practically vibrating with tension and emotion. "Sit down," Rachel continued, her voice firmer now. "All of you, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." Morrison, Rodriguez, and Jackson sat, their movements mechanical, uncertain. They looked like children called to the principal's office, awaiting judgment they knew they deserved. Rachel remained standing for a moment longer, gathering her thoughts. Marcus, James, and Trevor watched her with quiet respect, recognizing that this moment belonged to her, that she needed to handle it in her own way. "When I was 20 years old," Rachel began, her voice carrying across the silent coffee shop, "I was a lot like you, Morrison. I just completed combat engineer training, earned my MOS, and I thought I was invincible. I thought the uniform made me special. I thought I understood what service meant." She paused, her scarred fingers tracing the edge of the table. "My first deployment to Afghanistan was a wake-up call. I watched a staff sergeant, a man named Tors who'd been my mentor, get hit by an IED during a routine patrol. He lost both legs and his right arm. I visited him at Landstuhl before he was sent back to the States. He was 28 years old, and his life had been irrevocably changed in the span of a heartbeat." Morrison's breathing had become shallow, his eyes fixed on Rachel's face. "Staff Sergeant Tors told me something in that hospital room that I've never forgotten," Rachel continued. "He said, 'Chen, the uniform doesn't make you a Marine. The hard days make you a Marine. The days when you have to choose between the easy path and the right path, that's when you earn this title. And the hardest part isn't the choosing, it's living with the consequences.'" She finally sat back down, her eyes meeting Morrison's across the table. "You made a choice today, Morrison. You chose mockery over compassion. You chose assumption over understanding. You chose cruelty over kindness. Those were easy choices, comfortable choices, choices that made you feel superior for a few minutes." Morrison flinched as if struck, but Rachel wasn't finished. "But then you were confronted with the truth and you had another choice to make. You could have run. You could have made excuses. You could have minimized what you said or blamed it on youth or ignorance. Instead, you're sitting here, facing the full weight of your mistake. That's a harder choice, and it's the beginning of real growth." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Morrison said, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve to even speak to you after what I said." "You're probably right," Rachel agreed, and Morrison's face crumpled. "But here's what you need to understand. This isn't about what you deserve. This is about what kind of Marine you're going to become. You can let this shame destroy you, or you can let it forge you into something better." Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly, his voice thick with emotion. How do we make this right? How do we come back from something like this?" Rachel leaned forward, her expression intense. "You listen, you learn, and you spend the rest of your career living up to the standard you failed to meet today. Every Marine you encounter from this day forward, you look at them and remember that you don't know their story. You don't know what they've sacrificed. You don't know what scars they carry, visible or invisible." James nodded, adding his voice to Rachel's lesson. "In the teams we have a saying, 'Earn your trident every day.' It means that the achievement isn't what matters, it's what you do after you've achieved it. You three just earned the eagle, globe, and anchor. Now you have to earn it every single day by how you conduct yourselves, how you treat others, how you honor the uniform you wear." Trevor pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph, placing it on the table. It showed a young Marine in dress blues, smiling at the camera with infectious joy. "This was my little brother, Carlos. He graduated from boot camp in 2019, deployed to Afghanistan in 2020. He was a motor T operator, drove supply trucks. Not a glamorous job, not a job that gets headlines, but essential work that kept the war machine running." His voice roughened with emotion. "Carlos got hit by an IED on a routine supply run. He survived, but barely. Traumatic brain injury, lost vision in one eye, permanent nerve damage. He came home looking different, acting different, struggling to be the person he'd been before. And you know what he dealt with? People questioning whether his injuries were real. People suggesting he was exaggerating for disability benefits. People who looked at him and saw weakness instead of sacrifice." Trevor's eyes bore into Morrison with laser focus. "My brother ate his service weapon 3 years ago, the physical injuries he could handle, the PTSD he was learning to manage. But the lack of respect, the constant questions about his service, the way people looked at him like he was broken, that killed him. Words have consequences, Marine. Your mockery today. If Staff Sergeant Chen had been in a darker place mentally, if she'd been struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts, your words could have been the thing that pushed her over the edge. The color drained from Morrison's face completely. "Oh God," he whispered, "I never thought, I didn't consider." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, his voice hard but not unkind. "You didn't think. You didn't consider. You saw someone who looked different and made assumptions. In civilian life, that makes you an asshole. In military life, where we're supposed to be brothers and sisters in arms, it makes you dangerous." Rachel held up a hand, her expression softening slightly. "But here's the truth that Marcus, James, and Trevor have been trying to teach you. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of poor judgment. The measure of a person isn't perfection. It's how you respond when you inevitably fall short." She looked at each of the young Marines in turn. "Morrison, Rodriguez, Jackson, you're at the very beginning of your military journey. This is your moment of choice. You can let this experience humble you, teach you, make you better Marines and better men. Or you can let it crush you with shame and guilt until you're paralyzed by fear of making another mistake." "How do we choose the first option?" Jackson asked quietly. "How do we turn this into something positive?" Rachel considered the question, memories of her own journey flooding back. "You start by understanding that service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about sacrifice and dedication to something larger than yourself. You serve the Marine next to you. You serve the mission. You serve the values embodied in the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor: honor, courage, and commitment." She gestured to her scars. "These marks on my body, they're not decorations. They're not badges of honor I wear with pride. They're reminders of the cost of service, of the moment when I had to choose between my safety and my mission. Every Marine who's served in combat carries similar reminders, whether you can see them or not." Marcus stood and walked to the window again, his voice reflective. "When I left the teams, I struggled with purpose. I'd spent 20 years in special operations, and suddenly I was a civilian. My wife suggested I start a nonprofit to help veterans transition, to give back to the community that had given me so much. I thought she was crazy. What did I know about running a nonprofit?" He turned back to face them. "But I learned that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It transforms. Staff Sergeant Chen served her country in Afghanistan. Now she serves by existing, by being visible, by showing other wounded warriors that life continues after catastrophic injury. Her presence in this coffee shop every Tuesday morning, that's an act of courage that most people will never understand." Rachel felt something shift inside her chest at Marcus's words. She'd never thought of her weekly coffee shop visits as courageous. They'd felt like torture, like forcing herself to endure the stares and whispers because the alternative was hiding in her apartment forever. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know that anyone noticed or cared that I come here." Mike, the barista, spoke up from behind the counter, his voice gruff with emotion. "Ma'am, every Tuesday I watch you walk in here with your head up despite the stares. Every Tuesday I see you refuse to hide. As a fellow veteran, that gives me strength to face my own demons. You have no idea how many lives you touch just by being visible, by refusing to let your injuries define you." Morrison's hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Staff Sergeant Chen, I need you to know, I will never forget this conversation. I will never forget what I learned today. And I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, I will spend my entire career honoring your sacrifice by being better, by doing better, by treating every veteran I meet with the respect they've earned." Rodriguez and Jackson nodded emphatically, their own faces marked by tears and determination. Rachel studied them for a long moment, seeing something genuine in their expressions, not just shame or fear of consequences, but real transformation. The arrogant young men who'd walked into the coffee shop an hour ago were gone, replaced by Marines who'd caught their first glimpse of what service truly demanded. "I believe you," she said finally, and watched relief wash over Morrison's features. "But believing isn't the same as forgiving. Forgiveness is something you earn through action, not words. Show me, show every veteran you encounter that today changed you. Let your conduct speak louder than your apologies." "Yes, ma'am," all three young Marines responded in unison. Trevor glanced at his watch. "Marcus, we need to head out in 15. The meeting with the VA starts at 11. Marcus nodded, then turned to Rachel. "Staff Sergeant, before we go, I want to extend an invitation." A Marine laughed at her scars until 3 former Navy SEALs walked in for her. Part 8, A New Mission, extended 900 words. Marcus reached into his wallet and extracted a business card, placing it carefully on the table in front of Rachel. The card was simple, no flashy graphics, just clean typography on quality cardstock. Warriors Path Foundation, it read, with an address in nearby Oceanside and a phone number. "This is the nonprofit Trevor mentioned," Marcus explained, settling back into his chair. "We started it 4 years ago after I retired from the teams. Our mission is to help combat veterans, particularly those with visible and invisible wounds, transition back to civilian life and find new purpose after service." James leaned forward, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm. "We run several programs: job placement assistance, mental health support, adaptive sports, peer counseling. But the program we're most proud of is our Veteran Mentorship Initiative. We pair recently wounded or transitioning veterans with others who have walked the same path, who understand the challenges from personal experience. We've been looking for someone to lead our peer support program for wounded Marines," Trevor added, his deep voice gentle. "Someone who understands both the military culture and the specific challenges of recovering from catastrophic injuries. Someone who's been through the fire, literally, and come out the other side." Rachel looked down at the business card, her scarred fingers tracing its edges. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that. I'm still figuring out my own recovery. Most days I'm barely holding it together." "That's exactly why you're the right person," Marcus countered. "We're not looking for someone who's got it all figured out. We're looking for someone who's honest about the struggle, who can sit with another wounded warrior and say, 'I know what you're going through,' and actually mean it." Rachel's throat tightened. For 3 years she'd felt purposeless, a broken Marine without a mission, without a place in the world. The VA appointments and physical therapy sessions had given structure to her days but not meaning. She'd been surviving, not living, going through the motions while the emptiness inside her grew. "What would I actually do?" she asked, surprised by the hope creeping into her voice. Trevor pulled out his phone again, scrolling to show her photos of the Foundation's facility: a converted warehouse with meeting rooms, a gym, counseling offices, and a large open space filled with veterans of various ages, all engaged in different activities. "You'd facilitate weekly peer support groups, one-on-one mentorship for newly wounded warriors, and help us develop curriculum around transition challenges. We've got funding for a full-time position with benefits." "The veterans who come to us are struggling," James said honestly. "They're dealing with PTSD, depression, survivor's guilt, identity loss, all the things you've experienced. They need someone who won't give them platitudes or empty encouragement. They need someone who will sit in the darkness with them and help them find a way forward, not by pretending the pain doesn't exist, but by showing them it's possible to build a life that includes the pain without being consumed by it." Rachel felt tears building behind her eyes. "I don't know if I can do that. What if I make things worse? What if I say the wrong thing?" "You won't," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "You want to know how I know? Because you just spent the last hour teaching 3 young Marines the most important lesson of their careers. You could have destroyed Morrison with anger or dismissed him with contempt. Instead, you gave him truth, accountability, and a path forward. That's exactly what our veterans need." Morrison, who'd been listening silently, spoke up hesitantly. Staff Sergeant, for what it's worth, and I know my opinion probably means nothing to you, but what you did here today changed my life. If you can do for other veterans what you did for me, you'll save lives. I'm sure of it. Rachel looked at the young Marine, seeing sincerity in every line of his face. Something shifted inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that even her worst moments could become teaching moments, that her suffering could have purpose beyond her own survival. "Can I think about it?" she asked Marcus. "This is a lot to process." "Absolutely," Marcus replied, standing and extending his hand. "No pressure, but I hope you'll at least come visit the facility, meet some of the veterans we work with, see if it feels like the right fit." Rachel shook his hand, then James's and Trevor's, feeling the firm grips of men who understood strength came in many forms. As the three SEALs prepared to leave, Morrison stood abruptly. "Sir, I mean Marcus," he said quickly. "Is there any way I could volunteer at your foundation? I know I just graduated boot camp and I'm probably the last person you'd want around veterans, but I want to do something meaningful. I want to serve in a way that actually matters." Marcus studied Morrison with an appraising look. "What's your MOS, Marine?" 311, sir. Infantry rifleman. I ship to SOI next month, then to my unit after that." "Your first duty is to your unit and your mission," Marcus said firmly. "But when you're stateside, not on duty, and you've gotten some real experience under your belt, come talk to us. We can always use volunteers who understand that service is about more than just wearing the uniform." "Thank you, sir," Morrison said, relief evident in his voice. He turned to Rachel. "Staff Sergeant Chen, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but would it be okay if I checked in with you? Maybe came to one of your support groups if you start leading them. Not to assuage my guilt, but because I want to learn. I want to understand service the way you understand it." Rachel considered the request. 3 hours ago, she would have rejected it outright. But something had changed during this conversation, not just in Morrison, but in herself. She'd spent 3 years viewing her scars as endings, as losses, as evidence of everything she'd never be again. But maybe they could be beginnings too. "If I take the position," she said carefully, "and if you're genuinely committed to learning and serving, then yes, you can attend. But Morrison—" "Yes, ma'am." "You show up to serve others, not to feel better about yourself. The work isn't about your redemption. It's about helping veterans who are struggling. Can you understand that distinction?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." As the SEALs left the coffee shop, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, the espresso machine whirred back to life, and the other patrons returned to their laptops and newspapers. But everything had changed for the people at that table. Rachel sat alone for several minutes after everyone dispersed, the business card resting in her palm. She thought about the past 3 years, the surgeries, the pain, the loss, the isolation. She thought about the 37 Marines whose names she'd never learned, who'd gone home to their families because she'd walked point that day. She thought about the 200 lives Marcus said had been saved by dismantling Kari Ismail's network. Her sacrifice had ripples she'd never known about, impact she'd never considered. Mike approached with a fresh coffee, setting it down gently. "On me," he said. "Rachel, I've watched you come in here every Tuesday for almost 2 years. I've seen the way people stare, the way you force yourself to stay even when it's hard. I always wondered what kept you coming back." "Honestly," Rachel said, "stubbornness. Refusing to hide felt like the only thing I could control." "It's more than that," Mike said. "It's courage, and now maybe it can be purpose too. That foundation those SEALs run, it's legit. They've helped a lot of veterans find their way. You'd be good at it." Rachel looked at the business card again, then at her reflection in the coffee shop window. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't immediately look away from her scars. 3 weeks later, Rachel walked into the Warriors Path Foundation facility for the first time. The converted warehouse buzzed with activity, veterans working out in the gym, others clustered in conversation groups, some meeting one-on-one with counselors. Marcus greeted her at the door with a genuine smile. "Glad you came," he said. "Want to meet some of the people you'd be working with." Over the next 2 hours, Rachel met dozens of veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. Young and old, male and female, all carrying their own scars, visible and invisible. She heard stories of loss and struggle, of dark nights and desperate moments, but also of resilience and hope. An Army sergeant named Williams, a double amputee, shared how the foundation had helped him transition from viewing himself as broken to seeing himself as adapted. A Navy corpsman named Thompson talked about how peer support had saved her life when suicide seemed like the only escape from PTSD. A young Marine lance corporal, barely 21, showed Rachel the scars from burns he'd sustained in a vehicle fire and talked about how isolated he felt from his peers who couldn't understand. Rachel found herself sharing her own story, not as a lecture or a lesson, but as an offering, proof that the darkness could be survived, that purpose could be rebuilt from ruins. By the end of the day, she'd made her decision. "I'll take the position," she told Marcus. "When can I start?" 4 months later, Rachel stood before her first official peer support group, 12 veterans, all dealing with combat-related injuries and the psychological aftermath. Morrison sat in the back row, true to his word. He'd completed School of Infantry and had a week of leave before reporting to his unit. He didn't speak during the session, just listened with an intensity that suggested he was absorbing every word. Rachel shared her story honestly. The attack, the injuries, the recovery, the losses, the dark moments when death seemed preferable to continuing. But she also shared the small victories, the gradual rebuilding, the discovery that life after catastrophic injury could still hold meaning and purpose. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easier," she said to the group. "Some days are still hell. Some days I wake up and the first thing I see is my scars, and I have to fight the urge to hide under the covers. But I've learned that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new, someone forged by fire into something different but not necessarily lesser." A Marine corporal raised his hand, a young man missing his right arm below the elbow. "How do you deal with people starring, with the questions and the pity?" Rachel smiled, a genuine expression that pulled at her scarred face but felt real nonetheless. "I had someone mock me in a coffee shop a few months ago, called my scars a Halloween costume, suggested I was faking my service. It hurt like hell, but that moment led to this, to me sitting here with you, doing work that actually matters. Sometimes our worst moments become doorways to our best opportunities." She looked at Morrison, seeing the impact of her words written on his face. "And sometimes the people who hurt us become the catalysts for our growth. Not because we forgive them easily, but because we refuse to let their ignorance define our worth." The session lasted 2 hours. When it ended, several veterans approached Rachel with questions, seeking advice, or simply wanting to connect. Morrison waited until everyone else had left before approaching. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "thank you for letting me be here. I know I don't deserve it." "You're right, you don't," Rachel agreed, but her voice held no malice. "But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you're willing to become. So tell me, Morrison, what kind of Marine are you going to be?" Morrison stood straighter, his eyes clear and determined. "The kind who earns the uniform every day. The kind who never forgets what service truly costs. The kind who honors the sacrifice of warriors like you by being worthy of the legacy you've created." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then that's exactly who you'll become. Now get out of here. You've got a unit waiting for you and you've got a lot to prove." As Morrison left, Marcus appeared at Rachel's shoulder. "How'd it feel, leading your first group?" Rachel considered the question, examining her emotions honestly. "Terrifying, exhausting, meaningful." She paused, then smiled. a real smile that reached her eyes despite the scars. It felt like I'd found my mission again. Good, Marcus said, because we've got 3 more sessions this week and a new group of wounded warriors arriving next Monday. Rachel looked around the facility, at the veterans working out, laughing, supporting each other through their darkest moments. She thought about the long journey from that burning road in Afghanistan to this warehouse in Oceanside, about all the pain and loss and struggle that had brought her here. Her scars would never fade. The nightmares would probably never completely stop. But standing here, surrounded by brothers and sisters who understood, doing work that transformed pain into purpose, this was worth surviving for. She picked up her bag, the business card from that fateful coffee shop encounter still tucked in the front pocket as a reminder. "Same time tomorrow," she asked Marcus. "Same time tomorrow," he confirmed. As Rachel walked out into the California sunshine, she caught her reflection in the building's glass doors. For the first time in 3 years, she looked at her scarred face and saw not just what she'd lost, but what she'd become. A survivor, a mentor, a warrior who'd found a new battlefield. Her mission wasn't over, it had just begun.